Assalamualaikum semua. Apa khabar? Sorry, audio tak ada dekat sini untuk video yang saya pasang ni, iaitu Tony Siba punya video tentang Great Disruption. Apa pun kita almost dah ready. Saya dah kenapa tak boleh nak communicate dengan kita punya guest sekarang secara live sebelum masuk studio. But he's already ready, so I'm just going to I think he can hear me, so we're gonna start in about 2 minutes lah. Kita start 5 minutes early, get into the preliminaries, and then kita boleh teruskan lah kita bercerita hari ni. Okay. Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi. Khabar baik.
Thank you. Pertama sekali terima kasih kerana sudi bersama dengan kami hari ini.
Tak ada masalah. I am happy to share kita punya enthusiasm terhadap EV ni.
So I'm sure you are familiar with disruption, all these graph and tables that yang tengah ditunjukkan ni kan.
Betul.
How true do you think this prediction is about the disruption speed that will happen in terms of the car industry ni?
Sebab kalau kita bandingkan lah, I think Tony Seba dia ada bandingkan apa disruption disebabkan oleh internet, disebabkan oleh smartphone dan teknologi dan semua ni. Tapi memang kita tengoklah kalau all the new technologies memang dia punya acceleration dia tu, percepatan dia tu memang lebih hebat daripada benda yang kita dah pernah experience. Sebab hari tu saya ada chit-chat dengan kawan saya dekat overseas lah. Lepas tu then he pointed out something very interesting. Ingat tak the first time the Wright brothers terbangkan dia punya glider aeroplane tu dekat US, I think 1900 something kan, lebih kurang 100 tahun dulu.
1903 or something at Kitty Hawk.
Something like that kan. And then it took about 60 years to get to the moon. 60-70
That's
years.
Right. That's right.
But now and then
less than 40 years to get to jet engines.
Yes, exactly. And then but then from that point when we got to the moon until today, now we are actually landing rockets on their backs automatically on a weekly basis. So the acceleration of the pace of innovation, I don't think we can underestimate lah. Kita tak boleh pandang dah so in terms of the EV, and I think one additional factor that is driving this is the climate emergency. It's no longer a climate crisis. Kerana kan kita dah tengok IPCC report semua tu berdasarkan gabungan saintis-saintis yang dah study benda ni dah 10-15 tahun dah. Memang we are in trouble if we don't cut emissions.
Right.
And that one is actually kerajaan-kerajaan seluruh dunia mengambil pandangan serius to this need. And so sekarang ni kita tengoklah, even kita punya kerajaan yang kita tahu kadang-kadang kucing-kacir sikit baru-baru ni pun buat komitmen untuk net zero earliest 2050. So that is very good news.
Alright. So although all these things are happening in terms of climate change lah, the technological change is happening, there are still many countries yang masih lagi tak nampak the necessity of doing this. Why do you think that is?
I think for the most part dia ada divided into dua lah. Ada yang satu mungkin dia not very aware ataupun rakyat dia, the citizens are not very aware of the impact of climate change over the long term. That's one group. The other one is memang dia aware tapi keadaan ekonomi ataupun keadaan maturity sesebuah negara tu dia tak cukup lagi untuk give a lot of weight to this. Dia lebih sibuk untuk cari benda-benda basic macam communication, macam makan dan sebagainya. So kalau kita tengok dekat region kita sekarang ni, region ASEAN kan, yang negara pertama sekali kita nampak yang banyak buat pengumuman lah direction kerajaan terhadap EV ni adalah Thailand, lepas tu follow closely dengan Singapore kan. Singapore last year kan dia buat announcement besar-besaran 60,000 charger, lepas tu insentif, pengurangan road tax dan sebagainya. Dan along the way kita dengar Indonesia pun dia attracting investors untuk datang buat bateri dekat sana dan sebagainya. Dan I think last week negara Filipina buat undang-undang untuk menggalakkan penggunaan EV di negara mereka. So dekat region kita tengok keliling kita memang dah hebat dah banyak buat announcement, dah formal announcement pasal EV policy ni.
So tadi you said that some countries are perhaps behind, mungkin kerana masih lagi mencari benda-benda yang lebih basic lah. So is it fair to say that the level of economic development also determines whether kita boleh move forward ataupun tidak? And what does that say about us in ASEAN?
I think the question is a little bit more nuanced than that. Sebab kalau fikirkan ada banyak negara-negara yang kita anggap mungkin kurang status pembangunan dia di belakang daripada Malaysia, dia orang pun nak leapfrog. Mungkin analogi yang kita boleh berikan ialah banyak negara dekat Afrika tu dia don't bother with landline, dia terus jump to mobile. Pasal telco ni. So setengah-setengah I think negara yang nak membangun ni dia nak jump straight to EV. They don't want to bother with expanding in terms of ICE dan sebagainya. So komentari terhadap kita lah, I think benda ni dah lama dah dibincangkan. If you remember actually Green Tech Malaysia under masa tu KETA dah come up with a low carbon mobility blueprint as a consequence of the green technology master plan yang dia develop tahun 2015 ke 2016. Dia develop earlier tapi dia publish lebih kurang masa tu lah. Lepas tu they went on to develop more detail, depa halusi lagi spesifik untuk mobility blueprint ni yang cover bukan sahaja EV lah. Dia cover how to move people into public transport untuk mengurangkan pengeluaran karbon daripada transport ni. Lepas tu dia also study biofuel, dia also study cara untuk increase energy efficiency of the cars that are sold in Malaysia. Tapi benda ni walaupun dah ada start working on it, I think 2017 ke 2018, dia delay, tak tahulah, I think there's a lot of different factors. Itu yang menyebabkan sampai sekarang walaupun ada earlier this year kita ada nampak macam ada preview lah, I think Kementerian Air dan air dengan alam sekitar, dia ada announcement, dia buat announcement cakap kabinet dah approve ataupun bukan kabinet, dia ada majlis Action Climate Council yang dipengerusikan oleh PM yang dah approve low carbon mobility blueprint ni. Lepas tu ada a few details yang dia share macam insentif untuk EV, untuk biofuel dan sebagainya. Tapi lepas tu dia cakap nak kena masuk kabinet, lepas tu radio silent, kita tak dengar apa-apa lah secara rasmi.
Okay, so that's this level of maybe slow action ke apa ni, in my mind seems to stem from kerajaan tu sendiri tak sedar impact transition ini, apa yang akan berlaku dan apa yang kita perlu lakukan. And to me that stems, one of the main reason kenapa ini berlaku ialah kerana I don't know whether we have now or not, but masa saya mula tanya soalan ni, masa tu saya masih ada kerja dengan News Time tahun 2005, dia tanya tentang energy roadmap for the country. And pada masa tu the environment minister said that they have an energy roadmap but it did not include the transport sector, which doesn't make sense at all. And to this day I still tak nampak an energy roadmap for the country yang cover everything that shows what are the savings that we can get if we move this way or move that way. And I don't see, and is that why you think we are unclear about what we want to do?
Memang I think daripada dulu lagi, one of the big feedback that we have from background saya masa saya kerja dan kerjaan dulu, we look after energy and we look also after the oil and gas industry daripada pemandu punya standpoint. If you remember, ada one exercise back in 2018 ke yang KJ punya baby TN50 punya vision, transformasi nasional kan, and part of that workshop is actually looking after this whole energy and energy policy and energy transformation punya side. And one consistent feedback that we have is actually kat Malaysia ni, daripada segi dasar, daripada segi polisi, daripada segi players, there is very fragmented how we manage it, kan? Because kalau electricity dengan power sector dekat bawah Kementerian Tenaga, kalau daripada segi emissions, Kementerian Alam Sekitar, daripada segi industri minyak, nominally under EPU, tapi directly, legally, but according to the law, under Prime Minister directly. Lepas tu adalah banyaklah lagi, macam you cakap tadi tu, ada, you tanya MOT pun ada juga, because MOT ada dasar dia sendiri. So benda ni fragmented sangat, so it took I guess banyak discussion and banyak back and forth, because you know how it is lah, complexity. You tambah lagi satu parti dalam discussion tu, lepas tu semua parti kena coordinate dengan tu, tambah lagi satu. So I think that's part of the reason why we have a lot of difficulty in coming up with a single dasar tenaga yang take into account the affordability, the security, the environmental impact, dan juga daripada segi menggunakan dasar tenaga ni untuk perhaps catalyze perkembangan baru dalam industri-industri yang kita boleh gunakan untuk get a competitive advantage. So itu sebabnya the fragmentation tu.
Okay, but before we move further, I lupa nak intro, you introduce yourself. So perhaps Datuk Syarul boleh cerita sikit, you are as a president of My Evoke tu apa, and your experience in this, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, green mobility or green energy.
Boleh lah,
and
I
also,
give a very high level. So cerita dia, My Evoke ni, kita mulakan dengan a bunch of other EV enthusiasts. Tahun 2019 officially kita register, tapi kita start working on it in 2018 dah, 2018. Masa tu, but then I have been driving an EV since 2017. So cerita dia, bila I tengok EV ni, okay, yang this one is under Green Tech punya program tu, Tesla Model S.
Right.
So in the year,
so you're among that first group lah yang dapat the Model S tu.
Yes, correct. Masa tu pun cerita dia funny, because masa tu MGTC dia adakan program nak bawa 100, tetapi dia punya terms of that agreement is untuk agensi kerajaan sahaja. Lepas tu they were struggling to actually get agensi kerajaan untuk dapatkan benda ni. Lepas tu after we went back and forth a few times, they opened up to a few members of this is official members of MGTC. Masa tu pun saya kerja-kerjaan, so they opened up the list to individuals in addition to government agency dan sebagainya. So I went for a few test drive. I suka kereta tu, and I found that it's actually a very nice car, more than kalau kita kan, it's a difference between a nice car and a nice EV. Whereas actually as a car, is actually a very nice car to use. Powerful, acceleration dia bagus, lepas tu comfortable. So after using that for a while, then I start thinking it's actually like kita punya perkembangan EV dekat Malaysia ni, especially the charging infrastructure, tak banyak feedback daripada user. Tak banyak feedback daripada user, not only the charging infrastructure, in addition to that, kita tak ada banyak feedback untuk polisi-polisi yang menggalakkan penggunaan EV. That's why actually we said that, kalau kat Malaysia ni yang banyak bagi feedback pada government adalah ahli-ahli industri, company-company besar, bukannya user, but in the end the user juga yang beli kereta ni, yang menggunakan benda ni. So we form the club mostly to actually also tengok dalam social media ramai orang dia tak tahu banyak pasal EV ni. Satu mitos yang kita selalu sangat jumpa adalah dekat Malaysia tak boleh pakai EV sebab kita negara panas. Lepas tu bateri habis mati, kena replace every 2-3 years, and that is actually very very not true lah. Lagi satu yang
Well,
bestnya,
the thing is that, but to be fair, the fear came from the early hybrid cars, which did have some quite
correct.
appalling track record with their batteries lah. And so,
Yes.
you know,
Yeah,
damage
and
has
that's the
been
part we
done,
try to
so it
explain.
takes time. Hmm.
Yeah, right. That's where we try to explain lah. For example, yang
Hmm.
the old hybrid tu, dia punya battery technology different, nickel metal hydride. Sekarang lithium ion. Lagipun masa tu pun dia orang panggil pakai cooling apa tau. Dia ada lubang dekat bawah kursi belakang tu, dia pull aircon punya air masuk dalam bateri tu. So a lot of times user tak sedar benda tu dah clog up. So benda tu panas. So it's a lot to do with also the technology, the design dan sebagainya. So kita try nak explain benda-benda ni. And lagi satu yang best mitos yang kita dengar is actually EV ni kalau Malaysia ada banjir kilat, you drive, habis kena kejutan elektrik. Lepas tu kita tunjuklah video ada member-member kita yang bawa Model 3 ni masuk banjir selamba je. So kita try nak dispel all this rumors, this myth, so that people are more comfortable into exploring and people realize actually dekat Malaysia masih boleh pakai EV. And also dekat Malaysia kalau kita gunakan EV ni, for example, kita dah buat dia punya calculation, walaupun kita punya petrol ada subsidi, ada price cap, berbandingkan dengan penggunaan pakai elektrik, kita boleh dapat savings 20-30%, lebih murah daripada menggunakan kereta minyak. So benda-benda macam tu. So kita continuously engage lah melalui social media, melalui channel macam channel Fantastico ni, dan kita ada kadang-kadang buat webinar dan sebagainya.
So okay, the benda-benda yang macam pembaharuan teknologi ataupun the standards for the car tu, I think eventually bila orang dah benda tu dah banyak, dia akan faham lah bahawa kereta-kereta ni semua diuji dengan cara yang sama, ya, go through water fording, semua sama je lah. Dia tak ada isu nak short circuit ke apa benda ke. But practically kalau dekat Malaysia ni, since you dah ada pengalaman dah 4 tahun lebih dengan EV ni, the fact that there is no charging place outside, I mean in practical terms lah, how does that affect the usability ataupun kegunaan kereta tu?
Betul. Sebab kalau kita tengok kan sekarang baru ni aja, I think within the past maybe year, barulah ada what we call rapid charging stations, the DC charging stations. Kebanyakan yang ada sekarang ni, sekarang ni total dekat Malaysia sikit lebih kurang 400-500. Daripada 400-500 tu mungkin ada 12 saja yang DC fast charging ni. Yang 12 tu pun mula wujud only in the past year or so. So masa mula bawa EV tu, zero DC charging. Especially nak jangan cakap lah kalau nak pergi luar daripada Lembah Kelang ni. So the big challenge right now, and the big challenge was is like bila kita nak keluar jalan pergi Penang, pergi JB, yang itu sekarang pun is getting resolved already. So kalau you pakai EV yang mungkin range dia 200-300 km, which is even the Chinese mid-range EV macam Aura ataupun MG boleh buat, no problem kalau setakat West Coast ni. Yang problem sekarang ni East Coast untuk charging station dia. Walaupun kita ada member-member MyEvoque yang dah bawa kereta pergi Kuantan, Kuala Terengganu, Kuala Kubu, Kota Baru dan sebagainya, dia punya berhenti nak charge tu instead of half an hour, dia kenalah berhenti 2-3 jam. Kenalah lunch dulu dekat sana. Sebab kita MyEvoque pun ada, because we realise that's the problem. MyEvoque pun kita adalah buat sumbangan satu wallbox dekat Kijal Resort yang Genting tu. So they were very kind. They were Awana Kijal. They were very kind. They put they installed it. Kita bayar untuk wallbox tapi dia bayar untuk everything else, installation. So that's available to anybody. So kalau you pergi sana, singgah Kijal, charging, lepas tu pergilah makan lunch ke jalan dekat beach 2-3 jam, lepas tu your car should be okay to go all the way to KB. So memang setengah-setengah kawasan dekat Malaysia ni coverage fast charging ni memang has a lot of room for improvement.
Okay, you yourself, that was a Tesla Model S, which is like very large battery and all that. Berapa jauh you paling jauh pernah pergi daripada rumah you lah?
Sampai JB, dah sampai KT, Kuala Terengganu, Penang belum lagi. Yeah, that's my next one. Bila border buka je nanti saya nak pergi Nasi Kandar dekat Penang, jumpa member dekat sana. Lepas tu come back the same day. Lepas tu saya nak video semua, lepas tu tunjuk. Benda ni memang possible.
So Johor Bahru you boleh pergi one charge, tak payah kena refill.
One charge, tapi kalau one charge kalau ikut speed limit. Tapi kalau ada MyV yang cucuk bawa laju sikit, kenalah mungkin berhenti dekat Icro ke.
Okay, so I mean sekarang ni bilangan EV dekat Malaysia ni sangat terhad lah.
Sangat terhad.
So dengan ada 12 DC fast charger ni mungkin cukup lah untuk you all 400-500 orang yang ada kereta ni kan. But you ada any kind of statistics tak yang kata how many kita perlu ada minimum sebagai dia punya pencetus lah sebelum orang boleh maybe kind of realistically simpan kereta EV ni.
Memang betul, itu soalan yang memang ramai orang tanya, not only the users tapi orang government pun tanya, sebab bukan saja dekat Malaysia, because they need to come up with berapa agaknya ratio dia, nisbah stesen pengecas dengan pengguna EV ni, and that's a very difficult question to answer because it bergantung kepada banyak faktor-faktor. Faktor satu yang utama adalah EV punya range, right? Lepas tu EV punya charging speed. Lepas tu tabiat ataupun tingkah laku pengguna tu sendiri, sama ada digunakan EV tu untuk jalan jauh-jauh ataupun diguna EV tu untuk stay around one area and maybe once a year aja balik kampung dan sebagainya. So kalau kita tengok negara-negara lain yang macam sukses seperti Norway ataupun seperti state dekat California tu, dia pun ada tempat-tempat yang banyak coverage DC, tapi dia also ada tempat-tempat yang kurang coverage DC. Jadi susah sikit orang nak jalan, especially during peak season. And that has to do with the fact that actually setting up these charging stations, ada soalan tu juga yang kita tengok dalam forum ni, kenapa tak banyak lagi? Sebab setting up a very fast DC charging station actually is not very cheap, although kalau kita bandingkan dengan setting up petrol station memang kurang, it's definitely less expensive lah. Tapi masalahnya adalah bila you set up all these charging station tapi kalau tak ada orang guna, very difficult for you to justify to build additional ones. And sekarang that's why we have always said is actually kalau nak growth of EV mesti in tandem dengan growth in pembelian EV ni. So kita kena macam naik lebih kurang sana. Kita tak boleh macam ni, tak boleh macam ni. Sebab kalau banyak sangat EV nanti sangkut pula orang nak pergi keluar bandar ataupun keluar daripada Lembah Kelang, sangkut. Tapi kalau banyak sangat DC tapi kurang pengguna EV, nanti rugi pula dia orang because they spend 80,000, 100,000, 200,000 per charger, tapi orang guna maybe once a week. Oi, mati tu.
Ya. So okay, kat Singapore you pun cakap tadi dia orang buat pengumuman kata nak ada 60,000 charger by 2025 or some such number, some such date kan. So 60,000 untuk satu negara yang mempunyai population that is maybe 1/5 of Malaysia seems like betul-betul banyak lah. Bila kita bandingkan sebagai contohnya dengan kat Malaysia ni, kalau kita tengok stesen minyak, kita ada about 4,000 petrol stations around the country. If we say each station ada 10 pump, we have 40,000 petrol pump. And yet Singapore nak 60,000 electric charger. So ada some nisbah tak dalam yang kat mana-mana lah.
Singapore memang unik sikit though actually, because Singapore ramai orang duduk dekat flat. So a lot of times they need that 60,000 public charging station because very few people have access to home charging. So that's the part where actually they require to actually have banyak so dia punya ambition dia adalah bila you park kereta untuk pergi kerja, ada tempat you plug in. Bila you park kereta untuk pergi shopping, ada tempat plug in. Bila you park kereta malam-malam, ada tempat plug in. Sebab itu they are trying to get to that level. Kita dekat Malaysia actually ramai orang walaupun ramai orang dekat Klang Valley ni masih ada yang duduk dekat multi user dwelling, yang kondo dan apartmen semua itu, tapi lebih ramai lagi kalau kita kira seluruh Malaysia yang duduk dekat landed property yang able to install their own charging point at home for overnight charging. So maybe 60,000, that nisbah yang kita tengok 1/5 population dan 60,000 maybe not that applicable, tapi mungkin we can use a similar sort of ratio kalau kita kecilkan untuk lembah kelang sahaja sebab similar lah dia punya density.
Okay, so assuming that people who live in landed property yang ada garage kereta boleh masuk sampai boleh charge tu, assuming semua yang beli tu akan pasang wall box lah. Let's assume that semua yang landed property semua pasang wall box. You think 40,000 public charging points yang macam ada petrol station sekarang ialah 40,000 kita punya anggaran. Would it be enough or you think kena lebih sikit pasal mungkin masa charging tu lebih lama daripada masa nak isi petrol? Ataupun is there like a mix?
Susah nak kata. Susah nak kata. So that's why it's actually because kalau kita nak buat prediction sekarang, sebab technology also is evolving. The fast charging stations are getting faster, the cars are charging faster, the cars are actually more efficient. Even maybe they require less charging stations. So my view is actually that the more transparent we are about the number of EVs on the road and also the number of DC, and hopefully kalau kita dapat some idea about their utilization, bila kita dah ada ketelusan penggunaan tu, then the players can decide for themselves macam mana, how quickly and where they want to grow the charging punya infrastructure. The problem happens is actually that if there's a lack of information, then they have to make high risk investment decisions, and mungkin nanti you get places that banyak sangat overbuilt and underutilized, and you get places yang underbuilt and too many EVs want to use it. So it's more of a process rather than a prediction.
So there's no good statistics from anywhere yet lah untuk kita macam do some sort of planning. Belum ada lagi
Belum ada lagi. Yang ada mungkin yang ada modeling yang saya tengok adalah they model along travel routes, more along the lines of placement rather than quantity.
Right. Okay, so ni ada satu soalan daripada kita punya penonton lah. Dia nak tanya, kalau kita charging untuk elektrik kat rumah ni, dia punya charge sama lah kot kan, macam kita punya domestic rate kan?
Yep.
Dan dia nak tanya penjimatan dia. Is there like a guideline on how much you boleh save? And dan juga saya nak tanya lebih daripada tu, kalau kata ada public charging punya space ni, macam mana would they charge? Would they charge like petrol ke macam mana? How would you think they would charge?
Okay. Number one point ni kita tengok rule of thumb bila kita gunakan worst case scenario, maksudnya kalau charge dekat rumah kita pay peak tarif, because tarif kita dekat rumah kan 28 sen sampai 57 sen. So kita assume worst case 57 sen. Lepas tu kita assume also kita punya petrol kita bayar around 95, RM2.8 sen sekarang kan. So savings dia lebih kurang 30%. 1/3. Lebih kurang lah. Of course
itu kalau you at already the top band.
Yes, kalau penggunaan. So but the savings will start from there. 30% mungkin lebih tinggi lagi kalau you are in the lower band of TNB. Kan, per unit your electricity is cheaper. Dan juga you may use the subscription based charging macam charge EV kan, you pay 240 setahun, lepas tu you can charge. So that means that actually 240 tahun tu you can plug in any one of their public charging station for free. That means you already paid for it. So that one also akan mengurangkan cost you. So that brings us to the topic yang you tanya tu pasal how do they charge or what fees imposed. So setakat ni dekat Malaysia charge EV macam kita cakap tadi tu dia cuma impose subscription, lepas tu you bayar subscription aja, tak payah nak bayar untuk per session. Tapi kalau you go to the highway sekarang ni, dia punya fees dia adalah berdasarkan time rather than energy ataupun kilowatt hour ni. Yang itu ada sebab dia. Sebab dia adalah dekat Malaysia ni, kalau bawah Akta Pembekalan Elektrik, I think nama dia, you are not allowed to sell kilowatt hour. You can, if you want to sell kilowatt hour, you have to get a license, and in order to get the license, you have to have equipment yang dah certified dan sebagainya, because kerajaan dia nak protect lah consumer. Nanti kan orang tu dia punya meter haywire, you kena overcharge. So setakat ni dekat Malaysia by time only, tetapi I know that there are people who actually are working to work with the government untuk find some way to make it more fair, because kalau ikutkan teknologi sekarang, ada EV yang boleh charge laju, ada EV yang tak boleh charge laju. So kalau EV you charge laju, you untung lah kan, because you charge by time. Kalau EV you one of the slower charging ones, rugilah. And then CPO also, charging point operator pun pening, macam mana how do I make it fair for all my customers.
So eventually I guess most charging operator will get the license to charge by the kilowatt hour lah kot.
Eventually lah, I think that's the most fair. Tetapi I think that is a very long journey, because there's a lot of factors to be discussed, because like I said earlier, kalau for example, kalau Suruhanjaya Tenaga nak beri kebenaran untuk charge kilowatt hour ni, that means the equipment yang measure the meter yang measure kena di-certify lah. And also to be avoided from tampering dan sebagainya. So I don't think it's as easy as ST cakap boleh. Kena probably another, I don't know, a year of discussion between the involved parties, so that boleh.
Alat timbang ada orang datang check tiap-tiap tahun apa?
Ya,
meter minyak pun ada orang datang check tiap-tiap tahun. Kan,
it will be part of the process lah, nanti the discussion. So it's a matter of nailing it down. Tapi setakat ni kita tengok daripada segi teknologi, there's no reason why it cannot be done. So it's just a matter of thrashing it out, writing it down, communicating it, so that it's fair for everybody and everybody is clear about it.
So is there like a sense of kalau kata kita convert the entire fleet pergi ke kereta elektrik ni, what kind of penjimatan yang negara kita ni akan nikmati in terms of dollars and cents? Because to me, salah satu masalahnya sekarang ni ialah bila kita dah biasa gunakan fossil fuel ni, dan fossil fuel almost the whole world, there's some sort of subsidy lah on some way from any country pun, almost all of them ada, and kita tak nampak the real cost of it, right?
Betul.
It's not accounted for. There is no environmental element in any kind of accounting. Usually tak ada lah. I don't remember any kind of environmental cost being added kan. So is there a sense of how much sebenarnya kita akan jimat? Kalau kata kita tolak tapi environmental accounting pun just in terms of the fuel bill aja for the country, ada tak? You have an idea?
Ada last year, we just quickly, I think dalam chat WhatsApp lah, kita just quickly run through the math. I think ada announcement yang last year kita budget untuk subsidi minyak lebih kurang 6 bilion ringgit in total, right? And so that means that actually, yelah, kalau the whole fleet tukar and everybody use electricity sekarang ni, walaupun tak ada subsidi bahan api, tapi dia ada cross subsidi, di mana kita tengok pengguna residential disubsidikan oleh pengguna commercial. So orang-orang kat office dan kat mall ni, dia actually pay a bit higher, and then subsidi cross tu lah, tapi subsidi bahan api memang tak ada. So order of magnitude mungkin lah, kalau satu fleet Malaysia ni, sekarang kita ada 10 million kenderaan bahan api di Malaysia. 10 juta ya. Lebih kurang tu lah. So mungkin boleh save in the order 4-5 billion dalam fuel subsidi sahaja. Yang itu tak masuk lagi penjimatan daripada yalah, like you said, the environmental cost dan sebagainya, sebab kita tak kira lagi benda tu.
So, to me it becomes difficult. Bila tak ada, these numbers are not being
subsidi, lepas tu kita chop bill subsidi tu, habis.
So to me ini masalahnya, bila kita tak ada these numbers to talk about. Selalunya benda yang akan bangkitkan ialah kalau kita berganjak ke EV, nanti Petronas bankrupt. Itu the usual thing is that nobody can see the benefit in terms of dollars and cents. So how do we get more of this, more accurate information? To me, still the problem is because the country doesn't have an energy roadmap, and therefore we don't know the actual cost in terms of our energy bill to the country, and that's why we're not doing anything.
Betul. Tapi saya rasa that's a thing though, because we know exactly how much petrol, diesel subsidi yang kita kena ada, because whatever it is actually Petronas, Shell, BHP, Petron semua tu, bila dia orang procure dia punya wholesale petrol dengan diesel, dia bayar market price, kan? Tetapi kerajaan kita menetapkan harga di pump. So every month there is an accounting that needs to be done where these petrol companies or diesel companies claim back with the government. Right? So publish that number. Publish it on a monthly or a quarterly basis because it's all ketelusan, it's all done anyway and people accept it. So there's no reason why we want to go and sembunyi-sembunyikan number ni. Okay, look, we can say it's actually, for example, sekarang bulan Oktober. So first half of this year, this how much we spent exactly. And kalau nak, kalau berani, we can split it up. Okay, Shell this much, Petronas this much, BHP this much. And kalau berani lagi, kita boleh split by state. Kalau lagi berani, kita boleh split by daerah dan itu kita boleh buat analisis di mana daerah-daerah yang menerima lebih banyak subsidi, mana daerah-daerah yang menerima lebih kurang. And I tell you actually that pengguna yang paling banyak adalah pengguna di kawasan bandar, pengguna di kawasan tempat yang pendapatan tinggi. So orang boleh tengok subsidi tu pergi ke mana.
And also, kita tak ada discuss tentang the cost per kilogram of carbon that's emitted in terms of sama ada health ke whatever lah you want to calculate. So, I mean that's another thing yang memang kita tak ada and makes it difficult. Okay, ni ada satu soalan tu. Cuba tengok sekejap. Datuk, macam mana pula pengalaman maintenance sebuah EV? In general, ramai yang cakap EV memang less maintenance due to less moving parts. Tapi how far true is that? Ni Haris Hamdan tanya.
Okay, betul. Memang betul. Setakat ni saya 4 tahun Tesla, aside from warranty lah, ada one time dia punya screen besar dekat tengah tu mati. So tak apa, yang itu memang manufacturing defect. Setakat ni saya tukar tayar 1 round, tukar wiper 2 round sebab saya tak puas hati dengan wiper baru yang saya tukar tu. Isi air wiper. Itu je lah.
Brake pad?
Tak ada benda. Brake pad tak apa. Brake pad tu cerita paling best sekali. Sebab brake pad saya dah 65,000 km macam baru lagi. Because EV dia guna regenerative braking, hardly use the brake. Saya ada cerita dengan member kadang-kadang masa saya kerja dekat KL daripada rumah, whole way saya touch brake sekali je bila nak stop dekat parking lot dekat office. Sebab benda tu punyalah efektif. So
yes.
sebab kalau kita bandingkan dengan kenderaan petrol atau diesel, sebab dia nak tukar minyak tu adalah satu hal harga dia, tapi minyak yang dah terpakai tu sebenarnya toxic. Satu hal lagi, kita nak make sure that it is disposed properly. So memanglah maintenance untuk EV ni memang kurang, tapi caveat dia ada satu. Sebab kalau EV yang dekat Malaysia ni yang dijual oleh BMW, yang dijual oleh Nissan, because they follow the ICE service cycle, they make you go back every year. Tapi dia orang tak buat apa pun. Inspection, software update, lepas tu wiper ke kalau apa benda tu. Sebab the real maintenance item memang tak banyak untuk EV. Tapi kalau kita tengok maintenance plan untuk i3 ataupun mini elektrik ataupun Nissan Leaf ni, dia make you go back every year. Tetapi the good news is actually the latest iX yang BMW baru launch baru ni, dia punya maintenance plan boleh nampak, boleh nyata about half ke the cost of the PHEV model.
Right. So this EV daripada traditional manufacturers ni masih belum ada keupayaan untuk over the air update lah. Untuk software kita kena bagi balik.
Memang kebanyakannya belum lagi, sebab kita tengok dulu sekarang ni Volkswagen punya ID baru launch dia punya OTA, tapi dia orang masih takut-takut lagi sebab it's a very different paradigm because Tesla, Lucid dan sebagainya, Neo yang buat EV from the ground up, they follow that this is a technology product, so we update macam mobile phone, whereas actually the OEM dia masih guna paradigm OEM di mana kena safety, kena make sure it doesn't break, and dia orang punya software and hardware come from hundreds of different vendors, so dia takut if something goes wrong, it's very difficult to rectify or trace back where it went wrong.
Oh, actually, memang they are not incompetent to design the software update.
Betul.
Because Volkswagen has so much trouble with the ID3.
Exactly. Yeah, sampai Volkswagen punya CEO frust, dia cakap, oh,
That's right.
dia punya head of software were told to
Hmm.
resign. Remember when it
Yes.
failed that first time?
That's right. That's right. Okay, ni another question ni. Datuk, NAP 2021. In your opinion, how committed is our government in pushing EV adoption?
Itulah susah nak kata, because kalau macam kita go back to the earlier part tu, kita masa saya cakap pasal energy policy, banyak agensi-agensi ataupun kementerian yang terlibat. So it is not a monolithic ataupun one government in terms of whether they are heavily committed to pushing EV adoption, because some of the officers, some of the people that we've met, my board met, memang super committed. There are others who are a little bit skeptical. There are others who worry about the pace. Kalau kita cepat sangat, apa jadi kepada industri, apa jadi kepada grid, apa jadi kepada dan sebagainya lah. So it is not super consistent yet. That is pandangan kita lah dalam government ni. Tapi nampak gayanya sebab daripada awal tahun lagi kita dah dengar macam-macam lah menteri air dan alam sekitar cakap, lepas tu Menteri Industri dan Menteri Industri pun ada cakap. Lepas tu I think dalam RMK 12 pun baru ni oleh YB Perdana Menteri, dia ada mention dalam tu that government is committed untuk implement low carbon mobility blueprint. So we are becoming more and more optimistic.
Right. To me, one indicator of dia punya confusion lah is the EV road tax. So the EV road tax, as you may well know, is based on power output.
Yep.
And if you look at the way that it is calculated, let's say the Polestar 2, which has about 402 horsepower or something like that, something to that order. The road tax is similar to a car that has like 3.5 to 4 liter punya engine capacity.
Yeah.
Or maybe 4.2, I can't remember what, but so like around 4 liter punya engine capacity.
Yep.
And that seems to me is how you would think bila you tengok a 4 liter normally aspirated, and that's what you need. You need about 4.5 liter to get 400 horsepower. So it seems that they are still, their mentality is still a dinosaur punya mentality when they are setting up the basis for the calculation for the road tax. Whereas if we, kalau kata niat kita lah untuk sebenarnya Anjakan ni ialah untuk mengurangkan pencemaran, perubahan iklim semua tu, then maybe we should charge based on those criteria. What do you think?
Ya, betul. Negara-negara lain ada macam UK, dia guna emissions base kalau nak buat road tax. Tapi Singapore, they use the engine power ataupun motor power consistently, and that's the thing. It's actually as long as you use it consistently. Kalau ia pun kita nak charge the total power output of the vehicle, the CC base, and use dia punya engine output power. Setengah negara guna weight lah macam-macam. Tapi I think fundamentally what we need to do is take a step back untuk road tax ni. Apa purpose dia? Adakah ia untuk bayar untuk impact pengguna jalan raya supaya kita boleh repair? Kalau macam tu, then what are the factors that lead to it? Then it's like, oh, how far are you travelling? How heavy is your vehicle? How many axles there are? Because that directly impacts the state of repair, the wear and tear of the highway. And the best part is sekarang ni the technology is becoming more and more available where you can literally track. Kan? You can track how kita punya insurance company pun dah ada dah guna pun. You can track where you drive, how much you drive, how fast you drive, what car you drive, and then you can have a proper accounting untuk charge people properly for the road that they are using. Tapi itu mungkin
that becomes problematic, Dato'. If kita cakap road tax as in kira macam you cakap tu, the money that we collect for road tax goes into a general fund. It doesn't go into a road maintenance fund. Then kita, I mean, we're just gonna say as, you know, as I don't know, PR ke apa kita cakap macam tu, but that doesn't make sense because it doesn't go into a specific fund.
Betul. So that's also the misnomer lah. Then in that case, we shouldn't be calling it road tax. We should be calling it registration fee ataupun something like that lah. So that also something I think is worth to actually take a step back and decide, okay, what is this tax for? And kalau betul lah bukan untuk perbaikan jalan sebab everything goes on, then okay, what really is the purpose, justification? Because yelah, benda ni pun growing for like decades and decades and decades. Kadang-kadang the situation has changed so much, tapi kita masih gunakan method yang sama. Maybe it's time for us to take a fresh look and figure out something yang lebih efficient, figure something yang lebih fair.
I think the name that we use for it is so important. I mean, it sounds petty, because bila kita sebut road tax, semua orang fikir dalam kepala otak ialah ini untuk jaga jalan, but it's not for that. So I think the name that we choose, how we define what is that we're paying for, is very important. And you know, you're right. We should be calling it something else so that we then know, but better to know how to set the rate and all that kind of thing, kan? And okay. So ni ada kawan kita tanya ni. So dia kata dia perubahan ke elektrik akan berlaku secara natural kalau kedua-dua rakyat / pengguna dan kerajaan, agensi, bukan politician, dia kata nampak memang bermanfaat untuk Anjakan ni. Jadi apakah manfaat paling besar sebenarnya yang kita nak kena push, nak beritahu kat orang, inilah sebenarnya the biggest benefit of moving to electric is ini dia.
Daripada segi pencemaran, that for me is the biggest benefit. Daripada segi pengguna, bila kita move to EV, pencemaran daripada tailpipe tu, dia ada not only greenhouse gases tetapi juga the particulate matter, nitrogen oxides, dan banyak dah study yang proven di mana tempat-tempat di dalam bandar, especially the very high population density, the very high car density, dia long term effect to the brain development of anak-anak kita, the children, of school children, dan juga orang tua memang teruk. So bila pencemaran tu dapat dikurangkan ataupun reduce to zero entirely, memang kita punya quality of life, kita punya healthcare cost pun akan menurun. That's pencemaran. That's the number one point yang saya rasa beneficial to the user.
So if that is the biggest benefit, is there a price tag to it?
Betul. Last time bila kita orang ada discuss ni, adalah how do you calculate that, the cost and so forth. At that time susah nak calculate because it involves a lot of projection, because healthcare cost ni kan, bila school children for example, dia tak sakit sekarang, asma dia akan timbul later in life. Bila asma tu timbul, apakah cost dia? Lepas tu kita buat modelling dan sebagainya. Dekat Canada dengan dekat UK ke, there has been studies that actually puts this cost, tapi dekat Malaysia belum lagi. I think itu part of the problem here is that there's no coordinated effort to actually get to the bottom of the business case behind Anjakan EV ni.
Who do you think is the best, which is the best agency or organization to come up with like an overarching research to show this cost benefit analysis?
That's a good question. Kalau nak fikirkan daripada segi healthcare, of course it's MOH, tapi you think about it, it's actually climate change is bawah Kementerian Environment dengan climate change juga. So in the end, I think that ideally maybe pihak berkepentingan luar daripada kerajaan mungkin boleh commission study dengan university to do an independent study, to maybe get the tapi yang pentingnya data lah. Tapi kadang-kadang nak dapat data daripada agensi kerajaan ni lebih susah daripada cabut gigi geraham yang besar kat belakang tu.
Betul. Nak minta data registration JPJ pun mahal nak mampus. So ini Ace Area 51 tanya, Malaysia ada banyak kepakaran IT. Macam mana company kereta perlu take advantage of this? I guess in terms of when we move to EV lah.
Yap. Oh, memang tepat sekali soalan ni, memang bagus. Sebab kalau kita tengok the most advanced car in terms of integration dengan dia punya charging, driving and user experience adalah Tesla. So for example Tesla, bila you masuk dalam kereta tu boleh cakap dengan you where are the logical charging points, and bila you set navigate, then dia will beritahu you how berdasarkan how you drive, berapa banyak bateri boleh tinggal. So it's super integrated dengan information daripada dalam kereta, battery state, how you drive, dan juga apa the status of the charging station, sama ada orang guna ke, how powerful it is, and dan sebagainya. So kalau kita punya IT skills can be brought to bear untuk integrate in-car navigation, semua kereta dengan data-data daripada charging station, data-data daripada geografi, for example naik bukit guna lebih banyak tenaga, turun bukit dapat balik tenaga tu. Kalau hujan mungkin banyak lagi penggunaan tenaga dan sebagainya. Negara lain tak buat lagi tau. Sebab
to be fair, kalau you tengok Mercedes-Benz, I think this is for their trucks, this is for their trucks. So dia orang punya navigation software for Mercedes-Benz truck, this is like almost 10 years old already. Dia memang ada topo punya data inside the map, dan dia akan boleh bantu lorry driver tu planning. This includes suggesting gear changes and gear position depending on load. So benda tu memang something that can be done lah, cuma it's not been rolled out to the general public.
Malaysia, a lot of times these features are not made available sebab for example even the current PHEVs pun banyak feature yang negara macam UK boleh dapat, US boleh dapat, kita tak dapat because of local integration. The data points either are not there or not reliable.
Right.
So this is a tremendous opportunity untuk kita punya IT skills to actually don't look at inventing anything new, look at integrating and integrating it well so that data tu sentiasa dikemaskini.
Right.
I would imagine actually that customer and OEM would be very happy to pay for all of that.
Okay, ni before we move on to the current state of the industry, ni ada satu soalan yang kerap sangat naik lah. Tiap-tiap kali saya buat live, mesti sekurang-kurangnya ada satu orang tanya soalan ni. Iaitu tentang that car yang kononnya electric car yang nama My Car tu. Yang orang tunjuk, which to me for all intents and purposes looks like a high school project. But because dia punya masuk surat khabar punya pasal, semua orang ingat dia nak keluar lah sebagai kereta EV. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think it's a good idea to actually get our local players to actually play and experiment with the different technologies, and kalau boleh lah come up with teknologi yang lebih khusus untuk again kita punya local climate, local usage patterns, and maybe local conditions yang boleh memberikan value lah later on. Me just cerita dulu. Actually, I don't know whether the viewers are familiar with Matt Rimac.
Yes, Matt Rimac.
He's a Serbian kan. Dan he was so successful. He is so successful now that he joint venture dengan VW, and Bugatti now is under him. But he got his start by racing his E30 BMW, and when he electrified it. And so just by playing around with all these things, right, you not only develop the product, but you develop the skills, and you develop the people around you. And if you bagi peluang untuk orang engineering entrepreneur macam ni, they can be very, very successful. So,
but the difference between Matt Rimac and sometimes what we see here is that Matt Rimac just did everything on his own until it's successful. But these guys yang kat sini kita dah banyak kali kena nampak macam just chasing after government grants to do whatever we don't know, and that's the difference lah. That's why I think a lot of people are skeptical So okay, anyway, so kita tengok ni Forbes punya cerita ni, the electric car, the search begins. So how where are we in terms of the global transition, and how was our position Malaysia relative to that?
Malaysia position I think is memang definitely it's not in front, definitely.
Okay.
But we are not last either, and I think that part is actually, as much as kita daripada MyValk pengguna kenderaan elektrik mahukan negara to be more advanced, kita tengok contoh daripada Singapore, Norway, UK, US dan sebagainya, kita pun, but we have to realize also sometimes being in front can be difficult and costly because you tend to not be able to learn from others. And I think that's part of the message also. Kawan-kawan dekat meeting cakap dengan my Evok dulu is actually that tak apa, we know we are behind, but we must be able to use that so that we learn from whatever it is that they're doing, and we learn from whatever mistakes that they are doing. So dekat Malaysia ni, I think maybe ketinggalan sedikit, tapi taklah ketinggalan banyak sangat sampai kita tak boleh catch up.
I hope that is strategy and not lethargy, and I hope we have I hope we have a plan of being nombor berapa lah, jangan sampai ke nombor kalau F1 grid tu sampai nombor belas tak nak lah kan. Okay, ini satu soalan daripada Vision EV ni. What is the approach then yang the Malaysian government should take, let's say in the next 5 years? Do you agree dengan the low carbon mobility blueprint tu, and what the incentives that they want to offer to the auto industry?
I think the low carbon mobility plan dengan the insentif yang telah dinyatakan oleh berbagai pihak agensi kerajaan lah, is actually number one, is actually it's a good start. But the most important thing, at least from my opinion, is the continuous monitoring and governance. So that kita mulakan buat benda ni, tapi kita monitor lah. Sebab kalau target tu, let's say 100,000 EVs on the road by 2030, then we break it down. By 2022, berapa kita nak? 2023, berapa kita nak? And for a proper, let's just say like, bukan agency lah, tapi a proper governance body to actually be accountable, not only to report the progress, but also to tell the public what they are doing to solve problems. Right. Because decision sekarang yang dibuat ni, for example, the incentive huha-huha ni, mungkin work, mungkin doesn't work. Kalau doesn't work, what's wrong with it, and how do we adjust to make it better? So the important thing for me is actually like all those, bagus, let's start with that, but the accountability to monitor and to fix problems as they go along is even more important.
Do you think the number that they are offering, that is 100,000 electrified vehicles, kan, incentive is for 100,000 electrified vehicles, is that over 10 years or 5 years? Is that something that you think is a good number?
That one I think is not confirmed yet. So kabarnya is like the incentives will only apply to 100,000 EVs. But that one is also not confirmed yet. There's been some pushback on that, I understand also dari the forum tu. Tapi the most important thing is this lah, is actually whatever incentives that are given should encourage people to switch earlier rather than later, because kita nak curve tu become very fat early, so that then there's enough early adopters supaya ada critical mass. Then critical mass tu bermaksud charging infrastructure pun boleh jalan, service infrastructure pun boleh jalan, the skills development pun boleh jalan. Tapi kalau kita let it be open ended, then people will all be waiting, benda ni tak jalan.
Well, therein why I was asking you whether you agree with the numbers yang diorang suggest, what was 100,000, because was it 10,000 or 100,000 cars? 100,000 cars,
something like 10,000 for
10,000 over, right.
Tapi itulah, like I said, it's actually susah nak komen pasal nama-nama ni semua, because I think sometimes it's early draft semua. So rather than spend energy on whether it's betul ke tak betul, kurang ke, the principle should be clear. The principle is like, actually, if you say that you are limiting it to the first 10,000, that means that they want to push people to be eager to actually get in early, which is actually a good thing. Right.
But here's again, how the steepness of the S curve ni kan. What is a good steepness? And of course, this will determine macam mana kita formulate kita punya policy lah kan. In order to get it to which point, where do we need to be within, let's say, 5 years? In my mind, this is where we need to be in 5 years. Before then, it just ramps up. But that requires about 10%. Which means 60,000 kereta electrified vehicle a year. So can we get this in 5 years' time?
Yeah,
60,000 a year.
Because
and what would be required? What would be required, you think, to get there?
So number one, like I said lah, it's actually like first bila user ni dok fikir, oh should I change my eyes yang dah usang ni kepada EV ataupun to another more modern eyes. First question they ask is actually kalau aku tukar jadi EV, mana aku nak charge? So the
Right.
first question I think is the or issue that needs to be addressed is availability of charging network dekat Malaysia, public charging network. So that I think is something that needs to be really looked at dan diteliti dan executed properly. So the good news recently that we hear lah, BMW nak buka dekat dealer dia perkemar dengan mari nak buat 1000. That's all good news. Tapi pemantauan, monitoring dan making sure that this happens and this happens at the right places needs to happen.
Right.
Apa lagi satu faktor yang penting bila orang fikir nak beli EV ke tidak, harga, purchase price kan. So kalau buat apa nak beli EV if you are paying 40-50% more than the equivalent size ICE. So the government needs to do something to actually sort of equalize that price, either via elimination of taxes ataupun apa rebate ataupun grant dan sebagainya. So those are the two key factors that people will think about. Of course, later on, then people will start thinking about, kalau maintenance, kalau benda ni new technology, boleh ke I send not to a dealer because dealer biasa cekik darah, right? And so that's the third part that needs to be looked at in terms of building the after sales ecosystem. And so far, from what I've seen actually, sebab kita banyak PHEV hybrid dekat Malaysia ni, the skills for high voltage systems yang bateri dengan motor tu is already pretty good. Tapi kalau kita nak tengok the third party independent workshop memang tak cukup lagi. Ada maybe a handful aja and most of them dekat Klang Valley je. So that part actually kalau if we can get to grow a little bit more, of course in tandem with the numbers of vehicles that need after sales service, that would be helpful to accelerate the growth.
So this is a survey that we carried out among our readers lah. So I mean total number of respondents tak banyak 1,300. But as you can see, total of people who are already thinking about getting EV. Maksudnya kalau dah ada mampu milik dah boleh ambil dah. Within 5 to 10 years, it's total about 24 plus 57, 80 plus, 81%. And this number, I shared with a few OEMs in Malaysia. And dia orang kata, dia orang punya survey also shows the same thing.
Yeah.
So that means Malaysian dah nak benda ni tau. Cuma the ball as it were is in the government's court now. Macam mana kita nak make this transition because the people are seemingly willing to give it a go.
Yep. I think one of the problems or rather stumbling block dekat Malaysia especially is difficult for us to switch from maybe I pause there. Dekat Norway, what they do is actually that in order to make the cost of ownership, which includes the buying cost and the operation cost similar to the ICE version, is that they actually factor in, like we talked earlier, the emissions cost of the ICE vehicle. Right. So dia punya ada carbon emissions and dia punya nitrogen emissions pun dia ada tax dekat situ. So harga ICE tu actually is a little bit more because it's taxed additionally. Whereas the harga EV tu tinggi tapi they reduce a little bit to be competitive with the ICE equivalent by grants, subsidies dan sebagainya lah. But in Malaysia, that part where you say that you want to impose the cost of the environment to the Axia ke, to the Myvi ke, is a very, very difficult thing to do. Because for the past 20 years, we have been so focused on telling the citizens, telling the rakyat that you deserve to have cheap cars. You deserve to operate it cheaply.
That's right.
And that is our own fault because we have set up that expectation such that bila kita spew carbon dioxide, spew nitrogen oxide into the environment, ia tak ada cost. It's free. And that's the expectation that kita dah set, and we need to do a lot to educate people saying that no, it's not free. It's costing us, but it's costing us invisibly and slowly.
Okay, in this, like you said lah, in this early adopting countries, they all memang terpaksa mungkin bayar lebih sikit lah, because even the cost of battery packs have dropped in the last 2 years, dropped like 30% ke.
Yeah, a lot.
So now the cost of the car is seemingly almost in parity already. So to me, I rasa kalau kata the government tak bagi tak charge any kind of pollution tax on ICE pun, but just simply give a little bit of a tax break to the EVs, the price could be almost similar already. And anyway, the car, the small cars like the Asia semua, they have very small engines and their punya EPA rating there memang quite good anyway. If you, I mean, need to charge pun the fees going to be very small compared to the more expensive cars. So what do you think? So and also alang-alang tu kita tengok sekali cerita battery as a service tu jawab sekali.
Yep. So the battery as a service, I think, is being tested now with the new technologies, because if you remember about 10 years ago, Tesla dengan Renault tried to do the same thing, tapi they quickly ended that because I think the state of the technology at the time and people's acceptance of the battery swapping is not there yet. So now NIO has reported actually that their customers are liking this battery as a service. And they are planning to expand it to Norway to see how Western customers like it. But ultimately, I think that the drawback to that, because one of the things I pointed out is actually NIO ni, they haven't broken down what is the cost to set up the battery swapping station per vehicle dan sebagainya. So they don't divulge that. So the key point here is actually to set up the battery swapping station is very, very costly, because not only do you have to have like extra batteries to be able to swap up, you need to support, of course, the charging infrastructure and the technology to book, to swap dan sebagainya, but also the real estate cost. That's the part where a lot of people don't think, because if you set up the the swapping station dekat tempat-tempat yang orang ramai nak pergi, that means it's a hot area, real estate cost is going to be high. Tapi kalau you set up at places where real estate cost is low, tempat gym tendang, siapa nak pergi?
Nobody, exactly.
So that's the part where actually like I'm a bit cautious in terms of battery swapping yet, but good that private entities are trying out the business model. Some customers are liking it. Not all customers like it, because some people actually are more, I guess, conscious about dia punya battery state of health semua tu. I want to keep mine because aku jaga battery ni bagus. Nanti aku tukar-tukar nanti dapat battery orang yang tak jaga battery tak best dan sebagainya. So we will see how it goes on. My thinking is actually like kalau ada private company nak set up something like that in Malaysia, kita boleh galakkan. Kita see how the customer react. Kita see how the costing is like, and then kalau jalan lah, kalau tak jalan because also remember the battery charging technology and the battery technology, the efficiency itself is continuously developing. So it could very well be actually like in 10 years time, there's enough fast charging stations and enough cheap batteries that you don't need to have battery swaps anymore.
So for me, in my opinion, I think the problem with NIO tu ialah because bila kita sembang dengan Cik Amin itu dengan dekat you punya My Evoque punya clubhouse, and dia cakap 13 ke berapa belas battery has to be on standby at every charging station, and that's just environmental cost there apart from the other financial costs, and you have a battery shortage in the world anyway, so tak apa macam mana, how scalable is that kan? Okay, ini saya sekali lagi Datuk, ada satu lagi soalan. Zamri Iraman tanya soalan yang lebih kurang juga lagi, iaitu benefit to every strata of society bila kita convert ni. Selain daripada kita emission and health, the dollars and cents lah. Basically what people want to know is how it affects their pockets.
Running cost lah. Actually, the running cost, the repair cost, you tak payah tukar minyak, tak payah tukar brake pad, but that one tak banyak sangat. Because you compare the annual savings dengan operating cost dengan the actual purchase cost, kalau government tak subsidize lah the initial purchase cost of the EV, memang tak banyak, tapi ada.
If we assume now that China is starting to produce affordable cars yang harga dah reasonable, how many percent of savings in terms of maintenance did you enjoy with your car, and if you add up to the savings of fuel, how many percent would that be, the total savings for you?
Susah nak kata lah actually, because kalau nak ikutkan the comparable car to ICE, every tukar minyak every tahun, every annual service, kalau not under warranty, kan BMW dia ada free warranty, so free service warranty, so you don't really see the cost lah, mungkin 1,000-2,000 sekali masuk kedai, but it's still savings tapi tak banyak sangat. I think the most important thing in terms of the dollars and cents kalau nak tukar EV ni, memang ada savings, Tapi the main benefit comes from the emission side and the driving experience side. But the other interesting point on that is the I guess the driving experience lah memang berbeza. Kalau you try bawa EV versus ICE, dia punya relax is very hard to explain unless you experience it yourself. Less stress kalau drive EV.
Betul. So, I tell my viewers that kereta yang buat saya jatuh cinta dengan EV ni, it's not the Tesla Model 3, which is fantastic. It's not the Polestar 2, but it's actually the Nissan Leaf. And the Nissan Leaf, when I had it for a weekend, it overheated on me and scared me to death. Tapi the experience of driving it down to Melaka, it was so quiet and there's very little vibration. And what many of us that didn't realize, including myself, until I actually experienced it, is that the NVH actually causes a lot of stress and make us tired after a long journey. And when you get back in the quiet car, you macam, how on earth am I not tired in this car lepas one whole day of driving kan?
Exactly. So benda ni kita kena experience tau, sebab I was shocked bila I bawa Tesla I pergi Kuala Terengganu tu, bila dah sampai KT tu, I was still looking bawah, tak letih pun, not nearly as tired as we could have been kalau bawa ICE car.
Ya. Okay, ni satu lagi, dasar pandang ke Nordic ni mungkin nampak macam a joke sikit, tapi there are perhaps a few more parallels kita ni dengan Norway, in the sense that Malaysians seem still to think that we are such a big oil producer and therefore let's not waste it and all that. But of course, in reality, we are like number 24, 25 in the world, and Norway is number 12. So what do you think are the things yang macam mana kat Norway they manage to still have a healthy oil and gas industry and still manage to do this conversion, which sampai dia orang kata next year there might be no more ice cars.
No more new ice cars. So
that's right.
The Norway ni actually memang kita pandang dia memang with envy lah, sebab there are three factors actually that make them very very suitable for this. Number one is that over almost 100% of their electricity datang daripada sumber-sumber renewable. 98 ke 97% from hydro and the rest from wind dengan solar. So memang dia punya electricity green gila-gila punya green, and it's very cheap because a lot of it comes from hydro plants that were developed right after World War II. So kira dah bayar habis dah, tak ada hutang dah. So cost apa untuk electricity dekat Norway memang murah. Number two, also dia punya population very low and highly concentrated dekat the urban areas. They have only about 5.1 million people in an area that is as big as Malaysia. Can you imagine that? Singapore population dekat Malaysia. So lebih mudah dia orang to start with big cities like Oslo, like a few other cities lah over there. I don't remember the names, Stavanger dan sebagainya. So faktor number 3 of course is actually that the government is very very wealthy from oil and gas. So they can afford to actually forego the revenue bila dia cut taxes untuk EV. For example, if you buy EV dekat Norway dulu-dulu lah, you don't pay any sales tax.
That's right.
The equivalent of GST dan sebagainya. So subsidi yang diberikan untuk kenderaan EV dekat Norway tu, the government can afford. So memang uniquely positioned. Norway ni memang kira outlier lah kalau kita nak compare. Kalau kita nak compare keadaan kita dengan similar countries, maybe we look north to Thailand. Thailand is quite similar to us in terms of income, in terms of also oil and gas pun dia orang ada juga sikit. Sumber electricity dia orang pun similar to us, gas dengan a little bit of coal. Kita boleh tengok dia orang punya how do they do it, and one thing I noticed how do they do it is actually they have a focus committee that is focused on moving the country from ICE to EV, chaired by the Deputy Prime Minister.
What's also interesting in Norway is that dia orang punya attitude to the oil and gas is to not make as much as possible this year, but to spread it. They already have in their mind they want to spread this income over X number of years, and therefore we're gonna limit the amount of oil that we're gonna extract in a year. So that's part of the thing lah. So ni soalan lagi satu ni, adakah Malaysia telah bersedia? Itu satu. Dan kedua yang saya nak tambah ke atas adakah Malaysia telah bersedia ni adalah adakah kita bersedia untuk menerima mungkin lambakan daripada China, because China seems to have excess capacity in terms of building not just EV cars but also battery. Mungkin the excess capacity for battery dia tak begitu banyak, tapi they still have excess capacity, and if we are doing nothing about it, do you think that there could be a scenario where the Chinese start sending their cars over and we are swamped by it, and you cannot run away because their cars are affordable?
Well, I think kita tengok daripada pandangan siapa lah, daripada sudut pandangan siapa, daripada sudut pandangan user, baguslah. More choices, more affordable choices, and as long as kita punya JPJ, kita punya customs do their job to make sure that these cars are meeting the international standards for safety dan sebagainya, bagus for the users. We like to have a lot of choices. We like to have a lot of high technology choices. Tapi daripada pemandangan, daripada sudut industri, itu are we going to get swamped? That means that actually is our product going to be overtaken or cannibalized by cheaper products from China? That's a very good question. Tapi saya tak tahulah kalau for example kita punya local manufacturer is ready to compete, or are they thinking of buat dinding, jangan masuk. Bila they lobby the government untuk tarif ke, tak boleh import ni semua, then yang rugi siapa? Pengguna juga. Because then we fail to access the latest and the greatest and the cheapest technology, because kita punya local guys fail to adapt and fail to evolve with what the world is doing.
Okay. So the thing about the local players is that we have two big local players. One is associated with a Chinese company called Geely, and the other one is associated with the Japanese giant that is Toyota. And one of them clearly has access to products that can easily be brought over and swamp the market. You know, if they want to, and they've got their strategies in place, they can very well do that lah. Cuma sekarang ni kita nampak Toyota Group is pushing hard for hybrid lah. They are pushing very hard for hybrid, and kita nampak UMW Toyota punya side, when they decided to bring in the Corolla Cross, they already had hybrid in mind. So they had set up the whole CKD operation based on that. And what is also interesting is that bila kita tengok 2 hari lepas, there was a story. I don't know whether you saw this or not on Paul Tan.
Yang Toyota cakap hybrid is better kan?
Itu memang dia punya party line lah. So that's the party line. That's the press release that they sent out to everybody. So okay, kita faham lah tu. But this is the story that I want to show you. So this car was spotted in Bukit Bintang.
Right.
Spotted in Bukit Bintang with a Pro 2 trade plate. And inside this car is a Pro 2 guy in their uniform. So this is interesting because clearly they're doing it in the open.
Right.
They're doing it in the open, and with a product that is yet to be launched in Japan. Because the Rocky Hybrid will only be launched in November. And this is already roaming our streets. So my thinking is that the Toyota Group is whipping everybody into a frenzy over this lah. Although they're not admitting to anything, obviously they're not going to admit to anything, but this is already here. When this will actually come in as a hybrid form, kita tak tahulah, but that is the. Do you think that's a good move? That this is this step towards hybrid ni?
Well, I guess before that though, this tells me two things actually. One is actually that the players themselves are confident something from the government will come up,
right?
That will encourage
clearly. Yes.
Smart hybrid ke EV ke something is going to come up. So we can see the confidence of this. So they know something is up.
Yes. That was why my earlier question about your green mobility too, because it seems that they believe that will become.
Yes. That's why also optimism is increasing, because now everybody seems to be gearing up to plan for benda ni macam guarantee boleh berlaku. Because it takes time also, because if you wait for the announcement, let's say, I remember last time the announcement for something that's supposed to take effect in January, the government announced in December. Mati tu duduk, orang nak get ready. But anyway, so what I think about this hybrid is actually, it's difficult for a consumer to actually say which technology is better, because it's initially fundamentally, so what is my use case, and then
That's
kalau
right.
if the government actually has a goal, for example, 58% of GHG emissions from land transport, from transport actually, in Malaysia, and this includes aeroplane, this includes shipping, trucks and sebagainya. I was quite surprised. 58%, the majority actually comes from petrol four-wheelers, right?
They're heavy.
If
They're
the
heavy. It's just, yeah.
Yeah, so if the goal truly is to actually reduce that GHG emissions from one of the biggest places, so that means actually that you just put into place a gradually tightening emissions per requirement. So all new cars sold in 2022, for example, if you have more than 50 grams per kilometer of CO2, this is your tax, high. Kalau lower, then zero tax dan sebagainya. So naturally then the technologies will come here that will solve the emissions problem, right? Rather than saying that it's actually, oh, hybrid is better because we don't have charging station. I think that's the wrong approach, because frankly, if that is true, then we'll never get any charging station, because
That's right.
everybody will be buying hybrid.
Well, in Europe, they've been using that same strategy, where you might well know that Euro 7 is almost next to impossible to meet if you don't have electrification in the car.
Exactly. And that is correct, because ultimately the goal is to reduce the emissions. It's not to penalize technology A, technology B, technology C. And in a way, it's actually Toyota is saying the same thing. The enemy is carbon, right? So the right thing to do is to actually, for us to actually say, okay, what is the source of the carbon? Let's make it expensive gradually for people to emit carbon in the future. And so once that is done, then naturally benda-benda baru ni, and then people become more innovative. Mulalah ada like two-wheeler yang elektrik, two-wheeler yang convert daripada ICE jadi elektrik dan sebagainya, and that creates innovation.
What do you think about so because we're talking about now, how do we encourage the technology and discourage the emission of carbon? Of course, the correct way to measure carbon emission of any product, or carbon footprint of any product, would be from cradle to grave lah, from the everything to everything. But that can be sometimes a bit more difficult to achieve. So what do you think of just measuring carbon emission at point of use saja, as in tailpipe lah, basically? Is that a good alternative?
I think it's a good place to start, to actually go and impose a carbon tax on fossil fuels. So for example, Singapore sekarang, they have started a while ago. They enforce I think like $5 per ton of CO2 equivalent. So if we take that, right, I did some rough math a few weeks ago. Roughly speaking, it's about 1 liter of petrol generates 2.3 kilograms of CO2. So you calculate. So dah jadi daripada 208 RON 95 jadi 209 ke 210, tambah 1 sen setengah aja per liter. So that actually is a good start, because then that's petrol lah. Kalau diesel, lepas tu kalau kita nak tax arang batu untuk power plant, that's a different story, but we should. But sekarang ni kita cakap pump prices will increase by 1 or 2 cents because we want to impose a carbon tax. Now, Singapore $5 per ton is very, very low. The IPCC report yang baru ni yang keluar cakap pasal kita punya climate crisis.
So what would be the
is $70 per ton. That would be the quote unquote correct price that will enable us to reduce the GHG emissions sampai kita get to just limit 1.5C by 2050. Tapi there are some scientists who actually say it should be higher so that we can at least have some buffer. Some scientists that says if you put it any higher, mati semua industri. So I think the real answer should be that we start someplace very low and we gradually naikkan, lepas tu kita monitor the impact to our industry, our economy, our inflation dan sebagainya, and see how much we can tolerate, at the same time that it will encourage innovation and cleaning up of the environment.
So talking about the same subject ni, kawan kita Zamri Rahman tanya, is because he's of the opinion that EV adoption of EV is like a change in energy dependency. It's also like security for the country lah, basically kan. And if we can, everybody can install solar at home, that is something even more fantastic. What are your thoughts about how do we generate our energy usage in the future?
Yeah, actually that brings to a very interesting point, because dekat Malaysia ni apa kita punya solar, as far as renewable is concerned, kita ada hydro is decent, tapi hydro dekat sebenarnya Malaysia ni pun dah kira almost all tapped out already, susah nak grow lagi, ada sikit je lagi tinggal. So the next one is actually solar, because wind memang lemah dekat Khatulistiwa ni, memang is very difficult to make it work economically, financially. So solar ni dekat Malaysia walaupun we can see outside right now is very bright, there's a lot of sunlight, tapi masalah dia kalau large scale solar, bila ada awan lalu aja kat atas tu, dia punya voltage will drop, and kalau the plant is big enough and the cloud cover is big enough, dia ada set of problems in terms of grid stability dengan frequency dia.
Right.
That's why a lot of places they put battery to assist in this frequency stabilization. It's not so much bila malam. So on that point, actually, bila kita nak solar penetration banyak dekat Malaysia ni, EVs can actually play a very important role, because they are essentially very big batteries on wheels. Betul tak?
Right.
So when these are very big batteries on wheels, when the technology becomes mature enough, when more people have EVs that are plugged into their houses, then bila sunny macam ni, they charge. Right? Bila petang, bila keperluan tenaga tinggi tapi dah it's not sunny anymore, they draw the power from the car. And if there are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of these EVs that are used to stabilize the grid, we can get more renewables into the system. So instead of just 30, so instead of just 31%, boleh 50%. Because we have all these gigantic energy storage devices in the grid. Go ahead.
So that's the other, that's fantastic, because there's a study, I cannot find the graph now, which shows that even in tempat-tempat macam New England, where winters are quite long, they on kira that they probably need like 4 days worth of battery to allow for the grid to operate almost completely on renewable lah. And in that case, dia tengok solar lah. So what kita banyak yang tak realize is that the car itself is actually storage kan, battery capacity yang kita boleh link back to the grid. So is that like a strategy that, I mean, I don't know whether you've been in discussion dengan TNB punya orang ke, when they talk about is that something that they're looking at, or is that something that they're looking as a threat to them rather than of a benefit to them, independent solar and all that kind of thing?
Well, utilities all over the world are actually looking at this vehicle to grid punya technology, because initially they were worried because bila EV charging, that means it will strain the grid, and also because the EV side, the technology to transmit power back to the grid is only CHAdeMO, only Japanese cars can do it for now. So the technology itself is evolving as far as the car is concerned. And now that the technology is there, utilities are starting to work together. TNB actually has tested this. They actually have set up where they are testing vehicle to grid. Tetapi the only thing is actually that it's more like looking 5 years in the future when the technology is becoming available. Because kalau kita tengok sekarang, EV yang all in the market, very few can supply back to the grid. So there needs to be something happening at the vehicle side that will make it by default all the EVs can supply power back. Tetapi for now, what can be done also to help the grid is smart charging, which means that actually that you want people to charge when there's excess energy in the grid, but don't charge when there's excess demand for the grid. Bila orang nak guna aircon semua tu, then you don't charge your car. But bila there's a lot of renewable energy, then you charge your car. So you can control the timing of the charging.
Okay. So what's interesting, yesterday I showed a little study done by the US punya one of them, energy agency lah, looking at their punya grid readiness to accept EV. And they had a low adoption, medium adoption, and fast adoption scenario. And when they work it out, it seems that even in the fast adoption scenario, if let's say there was uncontrolled charging, as in there is no peak and off-peak rates to encourage people to go to the to where there's access, they could support within the current existing situation and the normal growth of the grid, they could add something like 6 million cars a year without any strain. And if you then decide to do manage
the smarter way,
charge, the smarter way, then that number is like increased by 4 to 5 folds a year. So it seems that I mean, they are great. And kalau I the other day I also did some simple calculation for us here. We could easily accept like almost 400,000 EVs charging without any real problem to the grid lah, given the existing situation. If we just maybe not charge during the peak hours. Masa the peak hours, if I'm not mistaken, maybe slightly less than that. But if we do it
malam
during pukul 12 sampai tu, then you can do like 1 million cars pun there's really no real problem yet. There's so much access from the rolling. So ni satu lagi kawan kita tanya, Alo Sates tanya tentang inisiatif untuk EV commercial, and I've always been of the opinion that we should push commercial a lot harder than we should push for private adoption dulu. What do you think?
I think the difficulty actually dah banyak dah. Actually kita try pilot kan, you know, the Cyberjaya ada cuba EV bus. Kita sekarang ni operating prasarana is operating dekat Sunway tu, the BYD e-buses. There's a few places, Melaka ada try lepas tu cancel, a few ada. Tapi fundamentally though, the issue is that we, number one is actually that kita biarkan all these projects to happen separately, so there's no scale. And there's no scale not only in terms of procurement but scale in terms of learning. For example, apakah yang berlaku tak betul dekat Melaka sampai dia cancel tu, orang Cyberjaya tak tahu. Lepas tu apa benda experience yang prasarana untuk when they are operating the BYD buses tu, orang Cyberjaya pun tak tahu. We don't share that information. It's not pooled together. So that's one part that actually is preventing us from doing this more effectively. But more importantly, I think number two is because kita punya buses and commercial vehicles, some commercial vehicles at least, dia dapat diesel super subsidy, which means that actually the math of any commercial operator, bila dia tengok cost EV bus, cost diesel bus, doesn't make sense for them to even bother thinking about changing, because it's just cheaper to run with diesel, because diesel gets full subsidies because government wants to make sure the fares are cheap. Tambang tu murah. So there's a structural issue here that is preventing teknologi baru, inovatif, menjimatkan, kurang pencemaran ni from emerging. We are keeping that down by keeping costs down.
Again, it seems that our reason for doing things may seem to be a little bit unclear lah. Why we're doing this, Okay, so ni soalan tentang what do you think is a good price for people to start moving to EV in a mass scale?
Oh, that's a difficult question because apa namanya, kita nak tengok. I tried to come up with a hypothesis. Kat Malaysia, what do you think is the median price for an A, B, C segment car? That means, where like, you know,
untuk
correct.
For segment A is going to be like 35-40 ribu. So that's what it is going to be.
So for me, it's actually like when the majority of vehicles that are sold in Malaysia right now, kalau four-wheel passenger vehicles, is probably in the A, B, C segment, kan?
Yeah. A and B mostly lah.
Okay, kalau you take A and B segment, you just say what is the median price for vehicles in the A and B segment. That means that when the EV reaches that median price, then it will start making more sense for the majority of people.
Then that means about 65,000 lah.
Okay. So then if it's 65,000, that means that if the government needs to subsidize, let's say 10,000 or 15,000 of that to bring the 70,000-80,000 EV down to 65,000, and then that will work lah. Then that will be the tipping point lah. To me, it's actually the calculation of what the current market, what is the median price. Once you hit the median price, then it will start changing.
Right. Okay, so Ini ada satu cerita yang I don't know whether this is real or not. Can cars be hacked while they're being charged ke?
Haven't heard of anything. This one, this news is actually about smart chargers. The ones that are actually the AC chargers that are linked over through the internet, so that people can monitor dia punya charging speed, dia punya energy usage dan sebagainya. So it's like people will hack in there and switch it on and switch it off independently lah. But it's not unlike your your home video camera pun. Your TP-Link D-Link tu pun sama juga ada risk actually, except for this one. The car will be smart enough to say no if the charger is doing something funny.
Okay, ni one question from Vision EV. Tanya ramai rakyat minta Malaysian brand EV lah. Jadi untuk buat ni selain daripada rebadging lah, what do we need to do to get the local EV to take off, and battery ni do we need to have them produced locally ke macam mana? What do you think? Any thoughts on that?
I think number one is we need to relook at the regulation, the safety regulation, the import regulation, the import tax, to reduce the red tape so that we allow more players into the ecosystem. The feedback that we have from our social media page is actually ada orang hobbies or small mechanics, they want to start tinkering, playing, repairing with EVs, but they cannot because they don't have access to the technology, because the technology is banyak red tape. Kalau you nak import battery satu hal, kalau you nak import battery sebiji boleh, but once you start importing a lot, then there's a lot of safety regulation. So benda tu mahal. It can be done, but it's expensive. So it naturally limits it to the bigger companies. But what this is doing also, bila you ada red tape macam ni, is that bila benda tu absolutely low risk baru orang nak masuk, because the initial investment untuk cut the red tape, to get the certification, to get the permission semua tu is tinggi, right? So the logic is actually once you democratize the low end of the market in terms of battery, in terms of importing motor, for example, the conversion that this is happening here, allow it to be registered or allow it to be registered under a special license dan sebagainya, then the demand is going to be created, the skills are going to be created, and then that will actually help grow the industry. So you need to start from the grassroots, allow the grassroots easy entry into the ecosystem rather than tailoring your regulations such that only the big boys can satisfy those regulations.
Tinkering is not highly valued in this country, and kita tengok the countries that are developed and are major powers in automotive industry macam the US, Germany, Europe, even Japan, they value tinkering and they encourage tinkering for you to do whatever you want to do lah, just play around with the technology. And that is something yang I think we need to inculcate into agencies like JPJ, Road Transport Department, where they need to maybe modify the laws lah to make this more accessible. Because
but also it's the philosophy. I find that I spent a dozen years in government. The philosophy is more like we when we want input from the industry, we invite the big industry players to come, right? But we often think that we know what the smaller guys or the rakyat or the tinkerers want. They never get a seat at the table.
They assume they already know what the rakyat wants.
They assume, as in like people, the rakyat or the tinkerers lah want. For example, they assume rather than consulting directly. So what happens is actually our regulations, our policies are more shaped by the big players for the big players rather than taking into account the tinkerers. Right? The tinkerers don't have a voice or don't have a seat at the table much. So that's
the whole philosophy of government. It's the whole philosophy of government. You're right. It's the whole philosophy of not knowing to put priority to what is important, which is what we are having so much problem with right now. Okay. Okay, ni last question lah. Kita tengok ni dia tanya Dia kata polisi jelas, industri kita kena standby bateri dan bekalan komponen EV kalau kita nak lead EV. Betul ke polisi jelas dan boleh ke kita nak prepare? Can the industry prepare itself with what is already available in terms of policy and direction by the government?
I think we should learn from our mistakes lah. Last time actually in 2010, 2011 kan, we had a fairly cohesive policy untuk reduction in emissions kan. Kita give tax free for all imported EVs and hybrids and so on and so forth. 2014 suddenly we cancel that. So the lesson there is the fact that policy jelas tu satu, tapi policy consistency tu penting juga, so that then we are clear what we want to do or what we want to achieve, more so than how we want to achieve it, and let the market decide how they want to do it, how the players want to do it. So because kalau kita nak tengok especially industri automotif ni, dia punya investment punya horizon bukan 2-3 tahun, is 5, 10, kadang-kadang 15 tahun kalau nak buat benda-benda R&D yang betul-betul leading edge tu. So when you change policies halfway, or when you U-turn halfway, it basically makes no sense for people to invest, and makes no sense for people to do things in your country because the risk is high. So the fact is actually like policy jelas satu, but we must make sure what is the policy meant to achieve, and be clear that this is going to be in place for a long time, so that people have confidence that they can make decisions based on that policy.
Yeah, the auto industry needs at least 15 years because of the cycle of the product. And you thinking about, you're designing a car now for 10 years down the road, because that's how long the car has to last, 5 years, and towards the end of it, it's already 10 years from when you started, and beyond that you now need to worry about the resale value, so that then it has continuity.
Exactly.
So any kind of short term is just not going to work. So ini cerita satu lagi kawan kita tanya tentang battery life ni. Is that something that is of real concern?
So far, I think what we touched on earlier lah, bila kita tengok hybrid, the first generation hybrid, and even the first generation Leaf, the EV ones, the technology, the BMS is not quite there yet. Memang ada concerns with the battery life. But so far from what we have seen, especially from the Tesla fleet, from the Zoe fleet that's in Malaysia, no issues with battery life. Especially when people are worried about our temperature, our climate, and so on and so forth. So far, I think inshallah we have seen no issues with battery packs. But the supporting fact for that is actually that all the EVs have warranty of 8 years, or 160,000 kilometers. Betul, 160,000 kilometers. And most of them will replace your battery pack if it drops the capacity below 70% within that period. So there is already some sort of assurance that your battery is going to be okay. And the other good news is actually because battery cost keeps coming down, there's a good chance if your battery fails after the 8 years, you may be able to buy a new battery pack that is better than what you got before for cheaper.
Yeah. Okay, ni dua lagi benda. Satu on screen tu ialah UK sales plunge as dia punya fuel crisis kat UK lah. And the discussion right now in terms of oil price is that it could go up again, and some of dia punya more bullish fans kata might go up as high as $180. What do you think will happen? To me, I think if it goes too high, lagi banyak orang lagi pergi EV lah. What do you think? The oil industry seems to be stuck between a rock and a hard place right now.
Exactly. I think one of the things also, in addition to what you said in terms of the harga naik, tapi the other factor is the volatility. Because market price untuk petrol dengan diesel, minggu ni satu harga, minggu depan satu lagi harga, minggu depan lagi satu lagi harga. And that is the part where actually that even if you are a private user, not a business user, satu hal juga actually, you don't know how much you're going to be spending on your petrol per month. Tapi kalau you run on electricity, not lagi kalau you have your own solar panel, which is actually very, very easy to do, that worry goes away.
Why is it so difficult to convince the government and countries to convert to solar when everybody knows that the sun will come up every day, and if it doesn't come up, it's not worth living anymore?
Tapi itulah, kadang-kadang the discussions are more along the lines of unrealized fear of change. Kalau kita buat macam ni, apa pula berlaku ni? Then you start thinking about benda-benda yang very low probability of happening. So in a sense, it's actually this what leadership is all about lah. My old boss used to say is actually a good leader is able to drag you to the future, despite you don't want to, for your own good.
Okay, speaking about fears ni, Red Hot Chili Popia kata dekat China sekarang dia orang bergebut lah pasal the big exodus kan, balik kampung dia orang So it's something yang we also face masa raya dengan petrol station, dengan rest area punya jam. So some comment lah maybe to say something of that in closing.
Well, I think it's a bit like, it's good that China, because they are way ahead of us in terms of EV adoption, that we see these problems happening, because now we know that this is something that needs to be addressed. And to me, it is not difficult to address. You just make sure that, number one, you build up enough charging stations. And I think number two, for example, Tesla, they know it's actually that, kalau peak travel season is coming, what they do is actually, before that, they will offer free supercharging between this date and this date, so that then most of their fleet will have fairly decent charge already before the travel period. So the other one that Tesla does is actually that, because they have control over the vehicles and the superchargers, they limit the charge to 80% at the supercharger, because the last 20% usually takes as long as the first 80%, because it's just the nature of the charging. And I think a combination of these smart ways of installing maybe a temporary charging station and so on and so forth are answers. But the good news is for Malaysia is, because our adoption rate is still low, even though, for example, kalau what we hope to happen will happen, our adoption rate will go up. We do have time to do planning, as in like communicate clearly, like, EV sales are going up this way, therefore charging stations also need to go up this way. Make that information available and transparent, so that we have fewer of these incidences where mati balik kampung then rebut charger. Plus also remember, kat Semenanjung especially, our driving distance not that far. Kalau kita,
that's right.
Kalau
it's a small country.
It's not a big country, and you don't really need to charge for like an hour halfway through. Usually kalau ia pun you need to charge 15-20 minutes je. So it is a problem, but it is not an unsolvable problem.
Exactly. Okay, saya rasa dah lama sangat kita ambil your time. Thank you very much for spending almost 2 hours with us today. For the rest of you guys, kalau you ada apa-apa lagi soalan-soalan ke yang you nak hantar ke Datuk, you can email me at fantastico.tv@gmail, dan kita akan cuba to forward it to Datuk or whoever else yang kita boleh usahakan. And lastly, saya nak again remind our viewers to be an activist. So kalau boleh kita masuk to the website yang still asking for suggestions for the budget, and beritahulah apa yang you rasa you nak kalau you peminat kereta elektrik ni. Dan juga hari-hari kalau boleh seorang sikit kita hantar surat kat JPJ, tanya dia macam mana nak convert kereta kita pergi ke kereta elektrik, walaupun you tak ada niat nak buat langsung pun, hantar je surat tu, and make sure you CC to everybody, tu dia punya ketua pengarah, tu dia punya menteri, tu Perdana Menteri, Jabatan Perdana Menteri, siapa yang you ada email, you boleh hantar, you CC je kat dia orang, supaya dia orang semua nampak kata inilah rakyat punya concern. Anyway, hari ni 2 jam penuh dengan ilmu dan maklumat baru. Terima kasih banyak-banyak Datuk. If you have any closing remarks you want to address to our viewers, please.
First, terima kasih Datuk kerana bagikan peluang untuk address banyak soalan-soalan ni. And just to add to what you said earlier, is actually like, don't underestimate your power to email your ahli parlimen. Kalau you ada macam soalan-soalan yang datang tadi tu bercakap pasal kos kenderaan elektrik, kos untuk charging infrastructure semua ni, just email dan tanya je your MP. And dalam My Evolve webpage kita ada satu post yang is pinned to the top, yang ada link untuk cari nama MPU dan dia punya email address. So just do it macam Atuk Syamsul said, go ahead and do it, and let them know that this is something that kita tengah fikir. Itu saja. Terima kasih.
Alright, excellent. Okay, terima kasih kawan-kawan semua kerana datang. Kalau boleh tekanlah kita butang like sikit dengan tekan butang share tu dan komen tu bantu kita, help us with the YouTube algorithm. Dan kalau belum subscribe, tekan bila butang subscribe pun kena duit pun, dan tekan butang loceng tu supaya bila kita upload lagi video-video macam ni, you akan diberitahu. Pemandu Malaysia, poin berhemah, kita jumpa lagi insyaAllah.